Stop what you're doing. Right now, somewhere in America, someone less qualified than you just got the promotion. Someone with fewer ideas just closed the deal. Someone with a weaker resume just won the room. And you know why? Not because they were smarter, not because they worked harder, because when they opened their mouth, the room leaned in. That's not luck. That's a skill. And for the next several hours, you are going to master it. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Your ideas are only as powerful as your ability to deliver them. You can have the most brilliant strategy in any boardroom in New York, the most innovative pitch on Sand Hill Road, the most heartfelt argument in any courtroom in the country. And if your voice shakes, if your words stumble, if your presence collapses under pressure, none of it matters. You will be overlooked. You will be outspoken. You will be forgotten. But that ends today. What separates the top 1% of communicators from everyone else isn't talent. It isn't charisma handed down at birth. It is a precise, learnable, repeatable set of skills. Skills that rewire how your brain processes language, how your body channels energy, and how other human beings experience you the moment you speak. The greatest speakers in history, from courtrooms to boardrooms, from stages to street corners, weren't born that way. They were built that way. This book is the blueprint. Over the course of these 15 chapters, you're going to discover the psychology behind why some voices command rooms and others disappear into them. You're going to learn how to silence the internal critic that sabotages you before you even speak. You will master the nonverbal language your body broadcasts every second of every conversation. You'll develop a vocabulary that doesn't just inform, it moves people. You'll learn to turn high-stakes pressure into your greatest performance fuel, to navigate conflict without losing your cool, to build the kind of magnetic presence that makes people remember not just what you said, but how they felt when you said it. By the time you reach the final chapter, you will not be the same communicator you were when you started. Let's go. The psychology of powerful speech. Most people believe that great speakers are great thinkers who happen to talk well. They have it exactly backwards. Great speakers are great thinkers because they've trained themselves to think and speak simultaneously. And that combination is not natural. It is engineered. It is practiced. And once you understand the neurological machinery underneath confident communication, you will never look at a conversation the same way again. Let's start with the brain. Every time you open your mouth to speak, your brain is running a background program so complex it would crash most computers. It is simultaneously retrieving vocabulary, constructing grammar, predicting your listeners' reactions, monitoring your own emotional state, regulating your breathing, managing your facial muscles, and checking your words against everything you've ever been told about how people will judge you. This is happening in fractions of a second, thousands of times per minute, without your conscious awareness. When everything runs smoothly, conversation feels effortless. But when stress enters the picture, something extraordinary happens in the worst possible way. The brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, fires. It floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline. And here is what that chemical cocktail actually does to your communication. It shrinks your working memory, narrows your vocabulary, slows your processing speed, and dismantles your ability to form complex thoughts in real time. In other words, the more the conversation matters to you, the harder your brain works against you, unless you know how to override it. Research coming out of institutions from Stanford to MIT to the University of Chicago tells us something remarkable about confident speakers. They are not less nervous than the rest of us. They are not running cooler neurologically. What they have done, through deliberate practice and specific mental training, is fundamentally changed how their brains respond to the chemical cocktail of stress. Instead of interpreting cortisol as a signal to shut down, their brains have learned to interpret it as a signal to focus up. That retraining begins with understanding 3 levels of cognitive processing that occur every time you speak. The first level is automatic processing. This is where the vast majority of people operate during conversations. They react emotionally, they respond without deliberate thought, and they speak from impulse rather than intention. Automatic processing is fine for casual exchanges. It is catastrophic in high-stakes situations. The second level is controlled processing. At this level, you are consciously choosing your words, monitoring your delivery in real time, and making micro-adjustments as you go. Most people reach this level only in formal presentations when they've had time to prepare. The goal is to make this your default mode in everyday conversation. The third level is strategic processing. This is where elite communicators live. At this level, you are simultaneously aware of your message, tracking your audience's reaction, reading the emotional temperature of the room, and steering the conversation toward a specific, predetermined destination. It sounds impossible at first. With practice, it becomes second nature. Think of it like chess. An amateur chess player is focused entirely on their next move. An intermediate player thinks 1 or 2 moves ahead. A grandmaster is thinking 6, 8, 10 moves into the future, seeing the entire board while making each individual decision. Strategic communicators do exactly this with language. While you are thinking about what to say next, they are already considering how their words will land, what reactions those words will trigger, and how to use those reactions to move the conversation precisely where they need it to go. Your brain has a filtering mechanism called the reticular activating system, the RAS. This network of neurons decides what information is worth your conscious attention and what gets filed away without notice. Here is why this matters for communication. Your RAS is programmable. Right now, if you carry a belief that you are a poor communicator, your RAS is actively scanning every conversation for evidence that confirms that belief. Every stumble gets highlighted. Every awkward pause gets amplified. Every moment of uncertainty gets magnified until it feels like proof of a permanent limitation. But here's the leverage point. The moment you consciously adopt the identity of a skilled communicator, not a perfect one, a skilled one, your RAS begins searching for opposite evidence. It starts noticing the moments when your words land exactly right, when a conversation flows naturally, when someone nods deeply and says, "That's exactly it." It starts building a new case. And over time, that new case becomes your new reality. The neuroscience of communication also reveals something about how your emotional state literally transfers to the people around you. Mirror neurons, discovered by Italian researchers in the early 1990s and since studied extensively across dozens of countries, fire in the listener's brain in response to the speaker's emotional state. This means that when you speak with genuine confidence, your audience's brain begins to experience that confidence as if it were their own. When you speak with hesitation or confusion, they experience that too. This is not metaphor. This is neurobiology. Your internal state is contagious. So the work of becoming a powerful communicator starts inside, in how you think about thinking, in how you understand stress, in how you train your brain to operate under pressure. The technical skills of voice and vocabulary matter enormously, and we will get to all of them. But without this psychological foundation, Every technique is built on sand. Before any important conversation, ask yourself, what level am I operating at right now? Automatic? Controlled? Strategic? That question alone will begin shifting your default from reactive to intentional. And that shift is where everything begins. Silencing the voice that holds you back. Before a single word leaves your mouth, a conversation is already happening. It's happening inside your head. And for most people, that conversation is the most destructive dialogue they will ever participate in. Right now, as you absorb these ideas, there is a voice running commentary on all of it, evaluating whether this is realistic for someone like you. Recalling every time you tried to speak confidently and stumbled. Quietly suggesting that maybe this level of skill is for other people. The naturally charismatic ones, the polished professionals, the people who seem to have been born comfortable in front of a crowd. That voice is lying to you. And learning to recognize that lie and systematically dismantle it is one of the most important things you will ever do. The internal dialogue of powerful communicators sounds fundamentally different from that of anxious ones. Anxious speakers run a constant internal risk assessment. What if I say something stupid? What if they disagree? What if I forget my point halfway through? What if they can already tell how nervous I am? Every word they prepare gets filtered through this threat detection gauntlet, and by the time it emerges from their mouths, it's been diluted to something safe, soft, and forgettable. Powerful communicators have retrained that internal voice to act as a performance coach rather than a threat monitor. Before they speak, they're not asking, how can I avoid embarrassing myself? They're asking, how can I make this valuable? Not what if they push back, but how can I present this so clearly that the logic is undeniable? This is not a personality difference. It is a trained cognitive habit. And like every cognitive habit, it was built one thought at a time, which means it can be rebuilt. Here is where most of this conditioning originates. Think back to a classroom somewhere in your past, maybe elementary school, maybe high school. A teacher called on you. You gave an answer. It was wrong or imprecise, or delivered in a way that drew laughter. Your brain, which is fundamentally a pattern recognition and threat avoidance machine, logged that moment as data. Speaking in front of others can lead to pain, and every similar experience after that, a stumble at a work presentation, an awkward silence at a dinner party, a punchline that didn't land, added more weight to the same neural ledger. The problem is not the experiences themselves. The problem is that your brain generalized from them, treating a handful of specific moments as universal laws about who you are as a communicator. Neuroscience gives us the exit ramp. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ongoing capacity to form new connections at any age, means that these pathways are not permanent. Every time you consciously choose a different thought pattern in a speaking situation, you are not just thinking differently in that moment. You are literally building new neural architecture. The old pathways weaken from disuse. The new ones strengthen from repetition. Over months, the new patterns become automatic. The rebuilding process starts with awareness. For the next 7 days, set an intention before conversations that matter. Whether that's a meeting with your manager, a call with a client, or even an introduction at a social event, simply notice what your internal voice is doing. Is it coaching you or criticizing you? Is it preparing you for success or bracing you for failure? You cannot change what you cannot see. Once you can see the patterns, you can begin interrupting them. Elite performers across disciplines, from Olympic athletes to Supreme Court litigators to TED stage veterans, use a specific technique, the pre-performance mental rehearsal. Before the actual event, they sit quietly and walk through the scenario in their minds, not rehearsing disaster, but rehearsing mastery. They see themselves entering the room with physical ease. They hear themselves speaking with clarity and conviction. They feel the audience lean in. They watch themselves handle a difficult question with calm precision. When you imagine yourself performing a skill successfully, your brain creates neural pathways that support that performance, as if the practice actually happened. This is not motivational fluff. Brain imaging studies at institutions from Harvard Medical School to the Cleveland Clinic have demonstrated measurable neural changes from visualization alone. It works. Use it. But visualization addresses the surface layer. The deeper work involves confronting the three core beliefs that generate most communication anxiety in American professionals. The first is the fear of judgment, the conviction that if you say something imperfect, people will define you by it. The second is the fear of rejection, the belief that your ideas, or you yourself, will be dismissed. The third is the fear of inadequacy, the nagging suspicion that no matter how much you prepare, you are somehow not enough for this moment. These fears share a common structure. They are all catastrophic predictions about a future that has not happened yet, based on a few painful memories from a past that no longer exists. And they all have a common antidote: evidence. Your brain does not change its beliefs based on arguments alone. It changes them based on repeated, lived experience that contradicts the old story. This means you need to start collecting wins. Keep a communication log, a simple notes file on your phone, a journal, anything. Every time someone responds positively to something you said, write it down. Every time you explain something clearly, and watch understanding dawn on someone's face, log it. Every time you ask a question that shifts a conversation forward, note it. You are building a case file, a dossier of evidence that directly contradicts every limiting belief your internal voice has used to keep you small. Over time, this dossier becomes the foundation of genuine confidence, not the performed kind, not the forced kind, but the deep, grounded kind that doesn't crumble under pressure. One final shift for this chapter, and it may be the most powerful of all. There is a reframe available to you right now that the most formidable communicators in every field have internalized so completely it has become instinctive. When your heart rate rises before a high-stakes conversation, when your palms get damp before a presentation, when you feel that surge of adrenaline before walking into a difficult meeting, your brain has a choice about how to label that sensation. You can call it nervousness, or you can call it readiness. Physiologically, they are almost identical. Elevated heart rate, heightened alertness, sharpened focus, increased energy available for performance. The only difference is the story you attach to the sensation. I'm nervous tells your brain to protect itself. I'm ready tells your brain to perform. Research out of Harvard Business School found that people who reappraised their pre-performance anxiety as excitement outperformed those who tried to calm down, and significantly outperformed those who just stayed anxious. The butterflies are real. Make them fly in formation. The body speaks first. Before you say a single word, your body has already given a speech. It started the moment you walked through the door, the way you moved through the space, whether you claimed it or shrank from it, the way you held your shoulders, whether they broadcast confidence or apology, the way your eyes moved, whether they settled with steady ease or darted with nervous uncertainty. All of this registered in the minds of every person in the room before your vocal cords made a sound. Here is a number worth sitting with. Communication researchers have consistently found that in face-to-face interactions, the words themselves account for a small fraction of the total impact. The rest, the vast majority, is split between vocal qualities and nonverbal signals. This means you could swap out every word in your next presentation for better ones and still move the needle barely at all if your body is broadcasting the wrong signal. This is both a sobering reality and an extraordinary opportunity, because while words are complex, unpredictable, and difficult to perfectly control in real time, your body is something you can consciously manage. And managing it changes not just how others perceive you, but how you actually feel. Start with posture, because nothing else matters if this is broken. When Harvard social psychologist Amy Cuddy published her research on what she called power postures, the scientific community took notice. The finding that standing in an expansive, open posture for as little as 2 minutes measurably changes your hormonal profile, raising testosterone levels associated with confidence and lowering cortisol levels associated with stress, was replicated across multiple studies and multiple countries. The mechanism is the body-brain feedback loop. Your posture sends signals not just outward to observers, but inward to your own nervous system about what kind of situation you are in and how you should feel about it. Stand with your feet shoulder-width apart, shoulders back and down, chest open, spine long. This is not about performance. This is about physiology. When you physically occupy more space, your brain interprets that as a signal of safety and authority, and it responds by giving you access to more cognitive resources, exactly the resources you need for strategic communication. Eye contact may be the single most powerful nonverbal tool in the communicator's toolkit, not because it is complicated, but because most people do it wrong in both directions. Either they avoid it, casting their gaze around the room like they're searching for an exit, which broadcasts exactly the kind of insecurity they're trying to hide. Or they overdo it, staring with an unbroken intensity that makes people uncomfortable and edges toward intimidating. The sweet spot is measured, intentional, and warm. In one-on-one conversations, aim for eye contact roughly 70% of the time while you're listening and around 50% while you're speaking. The asymmetry matters. Listening with strong eye contact signals that you are genuinely present and engaged with what they're saying, not mentally drafting your next point. When presenting to a group, land your gaze on one person long enough to complete a full thought, typically 3 to 5 seconds, before moving naturally to someone else in a different area of the room. Done well, every person in the audience periodically feels that you are speaking directly to them. Your face is a broadcasting station that operates constantly, whether you intend it to or not. The research on facial micro-expressions, pioneered by psychologist Paul Ekman and now applied in contexts ranging from the CIA to elite sales training, shows that expressions lasting a fraction of a second often communicate more truth than carefully chosen words. Your audience's unconscious minds are reading these signals in real time, drawing conclusions about whether you believe what you're saying, whether you're comfortable in the conversation, whether you actually care about the outcome. The practical implication: you cannot fake presence. You can only create it by genuinely engaging with the content of what you're discussing and the people you're discussing it with. When you are actually interested, your face shows it authentically. When you are actually invested, your body reflects it naturally. This is why the deepest work of communication improvement is internal, not cosmetic. Gesture, managed well, amplifies your message. Managed poorly, it leaks anxiety. Watch a nervous speaker at any corporate conference and you'll see the telltale signs: the pen clicking, the hand wringing, the small repetitive movements that serve as physical outlets for stress. These gestures don't go unnoticed. Your audience's nervous systems pick them up subliminally, and they start to feel the same restlessness the speaker is broadcasting. Purposeful gesture works entirely differently. When you use your hands to support a key point, opening them wide to suggest expansiveness, bringing them close together to suggest precision, using a firm downward motion to signal finality, your words gain physical weight. The gesture and the language reinforce each other, and the combined impact is significantly stronger than either alone. As a general rule, let gestures emerge from genuine engagement with your content rather than choreographing them deliberately. When you are truly excited about an idea, your hands will naturally want to participate. Trust that. Two often overlooked nonverbal dimensions deserve specific attention here: breathing and space. Your breathing pattern is visible to your audience in the rhythm of your speech, in the quality of your voice, in the natural pauses you either take or refuse to take. Shallow, rapid chest breathing, which is the default stress response for most adults, produces a thin, tight vocal quality and creates the kind of rushed, breathless delivery that screams anxiety to any room. Deep, diaphragmatic breathing, where your belly expands on the inhale and contracts on the exhale, produces a fuller, richer sound and naturally slows your delivery to a pace that audiences can follow. Before any conversation that matters, a job interview, a difficult discussion with a partner, a pitch to investors, take 30 seconds and breathe deliberately. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 6 counts out. Do this 4 times. You will walk into that room in a measurably different physiological state than you would have otherwise. Space, how you use it, how you move through it, how much of it you claim, communicates status and confidence in ways that most people have never consciously considered. Confident communicators move through rooms with purpose. They do not hover at the edges. They do not make themselves small in chairs. They occupy their space without aggression, without performance, simply as an expression of the basic assumption that they belong exactly where they are. That assumption, that you belong, is ultimately what powerful body language communicates. Not dominance, not performance, not a mask of confidence stretched over real insecurity. Just the settled, grounded, authentic belief that you have something worth contributing and that this room is a worthy place to contribute it. Everything else, the posture, the eye contact, the gestures, the breathing, is just the external expression of that internal conviction. The art of precision, words that cut through noise. Most people talk a lot and say very little. They fill the air with words, but those words land without weight, received, processed, and forgotten in roughly the time it takes to close a laptop. And here's the uncomfortable truth. They often don't know why. They assume the problem is vocabulary sized. Get a bigger word bank, they think, and the problem solves itself. They are solving the wrong equation. The real power of advanced word choice isn't volume, it's precision. It's the ability to select, from everything your brain has available, the exact word that creates the exact mental and emotional response you're aiming for. Nothing more, nothing less. That skill is not about impressing people. It's about moving them. Consider the gap that exists in most people's language. The average professional in the United States recognizes somewhere between 20 and 35,000 words when they encounter them in reading. But their active vocabulary, the words they actually reach for when speaking, typically draws from a pool of 3,000 to 5,000. That is a staggering gap. That gap represents untapped communicative leverage that is sitting dormant in your brain right now, waiting to be deployed. Closing that gap, however, requires a specific kind of discipline, because the fastest way to destroy your credibility as a communicator is to reach into that passive vocabulary and pull out the wrong tool for the wrong audience. Using unnecessarily complex language to sound sophisticated doesn't demonstrate intelligence. It demonstrates social miscalibration. The most admired communicators in every American industry, from Silicon Valley to Wall Street to Hollywood, share one characteristic. They can make complex ideas feel simple without making their audience feel stupid. That is the art. Start by mapping your professional terrain. What are the conversations that matter most in your world? Where does language have the highest stakes for you? In meetings, in presentations, in client interactions, in difficult conversations with your team. Your vocabulary development should be laser-focused on the contexts where precision matters most. If you lead a team, build your language around influence, motivation, accountability, and vision. If you sell, develop richer ways to articulate value, urgency, risk, and outcome. If you operate in technical spaces, master the critical skill of translating expertise into accessibility. The fastest path to stronger vocabulary isn't a dictionary. It's exposure to exceptional communicators in your specific field. Read the speeches of leaders you respect, not for motivation, but for craft. Study how they structure arguments. Notice which words they choose at which moments, and more importantly, notice what they deliberately leave out. Watch interviews with people who consistently communicate with clarity and impact. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and given enough exposure to excellent language use, it will begin borrowing those patterns naturally. Now let's talk about a specific vocabulary dimension that most communication books ignore entirely. Connotation management. Every word you use carries two layers of meaning. The denotative layer is the dictionary definition, the literal referent. The connotative layer is the emotional and associative freight the word carries, everything people feel and remember when they hear it. Skilled communicators operate primarily on the connotative layer because that is where decisions are actually made. Here's a concrete illustration. Two real estate agents describing the same property. One says the house is old. The other says it has history. One says the kitchen is small. The other calls it efficient and intimate. One says the neighborhood is dense. The other says it's walkable and connected. Neither agent is lying. Both are selecting from the available truth. But one is choosing words whose connotations align with the buyer's desires, and one is choosing words that activate doubt. In a market where perception shapes value, this is not a minor distinction. This same principle operates in every professional context. A manager who calls a workplace problem a challenge versus a crisis is not just using different vocabulary. They are creating different psychological frameworks in their team's minds. Frameworks that determine whether people feel energized to solve something or overwhelmed by it. A lawyer who frames a witness as mistaken rather than dishonest is deploying connotation to guide a jury toward a specific emotional conclusion. A leader who describes a strategic pivot as bold evolution rather than necessary retreat is managing the narrative about the company's trajectory. This is not manipulation. Manipulation involves deceiving people about facts. This is strategic framing, the deliberate selection of the angle from which truth is presented. Alongside connotation management, one of the most powerful vocabulary upgrades available to you involves eliminating the words that erode your authority before you even reach your main point. Listen to how many times in a single conversation the average professional says, "I think," "maybe," "sort of," "kind of," "I guess," "a little bit," or "I just wanted to." Each one of these qualifiers shaves credibility. Each one signals to the listener at a subconscious level that the speaker is not fully committed to their own statement. Compare these two versions of the same idea. "I guess I was sort of thinking that maybe we could consider possibly adjusting the timeline a little bit," versus I recommend we adjust the timeline. The second version contains exactly the same core content, but it's delivered with the directness and conviction that commands respect. The difference is not boldness, it is precision. Eliminating weak qualifiers doesn't mean never expressing uncertainty. Genuine uncertainty should be expressed honestly. It means not reflexively apologizing for your own thoughts before they reach the air. Register. The level of formality your vocabulary operates at is a dimension of word choice that the best communicators adjust automatically. The same person who speaks with precise professional language in a board presentation effortlessly shifts to warmer, more casual language over drinks with a colleague, then shifts again when explaining a concept to a client who is new to the field. This code switching is not inauthenticity. It's social intelligence. The goal in every context is the same. Be understood fully by this specific person in this specific moment. Finally, let's address the power of metaphor, one of the most underused tools in the professional communicator's kit. The human brain is not designed to process abstractions as efficiently as it processes images and stories. When you use a well-chosen metaphor, you are handing your listener's brain a shortcut, a way to map an unfamiliar concept onto existing mental architecture they already possess. This accelerates understanding, deepens retention, and creates the kind of vivid recall that makes your ideas memorable long after the conversation ends. The best metaphors do not just explain, they reframe. When a startup founder describes her company not as a software platform, but as the air traffic control system for modern logistics, she hasn't just clarified what the product does. She has elevated its perceived importance, communicated its scope, and suggested the consequences of its absence, all in a single image. That's not poetry. That's precision engineering with language. Your assignment from this chapter is simple and immediate. For the next 14 days, commit to one daily vocabulary practice. Find one word in your active writing or speaking that is vague, weak, or imprecise, and replace it with a better one. Not a fancier one, a better one. More specific, more accurate, more resonant for your audience. Do this consciously once a day, and your language will begin improving in ways that compound over time. Words are the basic units of influence. Treat them accordingly. Your voice is an instrument. Learn to play it. You have been given a musical instrument of extraordinary range and expressiveness. You have been carrying it with you your entire life. You have almost certainly never learned to play it properly. Your voice is not just a mechanism for producing sounds that correspond to words. It is a dynamic, trainable, remarkably versatile instrument that can be tuned for authority, warmth, excitement, gravity, intimacy, and command, often within the span of a single conversation. Professional broadcasters, trial attorneys, top-tier executives, and TED speakers have one thing in common that rarely gets mentioned. They have all, consciously or through years of deliberate practice, learned to operate this instrument at a higher level than the people around them. And the gap between where most people's vocal skills sit and where they could sit is enormous. Not because the training is difficult, because almost nobody pursues it. Let's start at the physical foundation. Breath. Effective vocal production requires diaphragmatic breathing, the deep, belly-driven breath that provides steady, controlled airflow for sustained, powerful speech. Most American adults default to chest breathing, especially under stress. Chest breathing is shallow. It provides limited air volume, creates tension in the throat, and produces a voice that sounds strained and thin when it extends beyond short sentences. Diaphragmatic breathing provides the kind of steady air support that allows your voice to remain strong, clear, and resonant, whether you're speaking a single sentence or delivering a 20-minute presentation without a pause. Test yourself right now. Place one hand flat on your chest and one on your abdomen. Take a breath. If the hand on your chest rises first and significantly, you are a chest breather. If the hand on your belly moves first and the chest remains relatively still, you are accessing diaphragmatic breathing correctly. Most people discover they are chest breathers. Most people don't realize this is correctable within days of focused practice. The correction is straightforward. Lie on the floor. Place a book on your stomach. Breathe in, with the sole intention of making the book rise. Breathe out and let it fall. This is what proper breath support feels like. Practice this for 5 minutes a day for 2 weeks, and it will begin replacing your habitual pattern. Resonance is the quality that gives a voice its richness, depth, and presence. What people mean when they describe someone as having a commanding or authoritative voice. Raw sound originates at your vocal cords, but the quality of that sound is shaped by the resonating chambers through which it passes. Your throat, your mouth, your nasal passages, and your chest cavity. When you speak with good resonance, when sound has room to expand and develop before it exits, your voice carries natural authority. When resonance is cut off, typically by tension in the throat, which is extremely common under stress, the voice becomes thin, tight, and weak. To develop richer resonance, practice humming with your mouth closed. Feel where the vibration is located, ideally in your chest and face simultaneously. Then open your mouth on an ah sound while maintaining that same sense of fullness and vibration. You are training your voice to carry that resonant quality into your speaking. It takes consistent practice, but the payoff is significant. A voice that commands attention without requiring volume. Pitch variation is what prevents your voice from becoming the thing audiences dread most in any speaking situation. Monotone delivery. The human brain is wired to stop paying conscious attention to stimuli that don't change. This is a survival adaptation. If something is constant, it's probably not a threat and doesn't need monitoring. A speaker who delivers their entire message on a single pitch is at a neurological level, training their audience's brains to tune out. This happens even when the content is interesting. The delivery overrides the content. The solution is not random pitch variation, which sounds artificial. It is strategic pitch variation, learning to use the full range of your voice as a deliberate tool. Lower your pitch when making statements of conclusion, fact, or authority. Raise it slightly when posing questions or introducing new concepts that you want to signal as interesting or significant. Use the lower end of your range to project calm certainty. Use the upper register to convey excitement or urgency. And critically, eliminate what linguists call uptalk, the habit of ending declarative statements with rising intonation, as if every sentence is a question awaiting approval. Uptalk is one of the fastest ways to undermine perceived authority, regardless of the quality of your ideas. Pace is where most nervous speakers give themselves away. Anxiety accelerates delivery. The fear is that pausing will lose the audience, that silence is failure. This is exactly backwards. Strategic pauses are among the most powerful tools you possess as a speaker. A pause before a key point builds anticipation. A pause after a key point allows it to sink in, to resonate, to actually be processed rather than immediately overrun by the next sentence. A pause when a powerful question has been asked communicates comfort with silence, which is itself a statement of confidence. When you rush through your ideas without allowing space for them to breathe, you are communicating at a subconscious level that you don't fully trust those ideas to hold up on their own. Trust your ideas. Let them land. Volume calibration is a dimension of voice control that most people manage unconsciously and poorly. Speaking too softly forces your audience into the exhausting effort of straining to catch your words, and people quickly disengage from anything that requires effort without obvious reward. Speaking too loudly overrides the natural dynamic range that makes speech interesting and can feel aggressive or overwhelming in intimate settings. The right volume is not a fixed number. It is a reading of the room, the distance to your furthest listener, the ambient noise level, and the emotional register of the conversation. A useful practice: record yourself speaking in different settings, not to judge yourself harshly, but to hear what your audience actually hears. Most people are genuinely surprised by the gap between how they sound in their own heads, where the signal is amplified by bone conduction, and how they sound to the room. This gap is where invisible vocal problems hide, and the recording is the flashlight. Articulation, the clarity with which you form individual sounds, is the final piece of the vocal foundation. Unclear articulation is exhausting for audiences. When words blur together, when syllables drop off the ends of words, when consonants become soft and vowels run into each other, listeners spend cognitive energy decoding rather than comprehending. The most common culprits: dropping the G from ing endings, running words together at conversational speed, and reducing the energy and precision of consonants that define word boundaries. Tongue twisters are not childish practice tools. They are precision instruments for training articulatory muscles to operate with speed and accuracy simultaneously. Read them aloud daily, starting slowly and increasing speed only when the clarity holds. She Sells Seashells by the Seashore is not poetry. It is a workout for the muscles that determine whether your ideas arrive crisp and fully formed or blurred and partially lost. Your voice is your instrument. Practice it every day, even for 10 minutes. The return on that investment compounds in every conversation, every meeting, every presentation for the rest of your professional life. The listening edge: how silence makes you powerful. Here is something that will change how you think about communication forever. The greatest speaking skill you can develop has nothing to do with speaking. It is the ability to listen, genuinely, strategically, and at a depth most people never reach. In a culture that has turned communication into a performance sport, where everyone is working on their delivery and their talking points and their presence, the person who actually stops and truly listens stands out like a lighthouse in fog, not just because it feels rare, though it does, but because truly skilled listening generates better information than almost any other strategy, and better information produces better responses. Let's be precise about what active listening actually is, because the term gets thrown around in corporate training rooms so frequently it has become almost meaningless. Active listening is not nodding politely while mentally rehearsing your next point. It is not hearing the literal words and waiting for a pause to jump in. It is an intensive cognitive engagement that requires focus, discipline, and the willingness to be genuinely surprised by what you hear. 3 distinct levels of listening exist, and most people never progress beyond the first. Level 1 is the literal level, registering the actual words being spoken and understanding their surface meaning. This is where most professional conversations operate. The problem is that literal content is the least information-rich layer of any communication. It tells you what someone said. It tells you almost nothing about why they said it, what they feel about it, or what they actually need from this exchange. Level 2 is the emotional layer. Underneath every statement, there is an emotional signal broadcasting information about how the speaker feels, about the topic, about themselves, about their relationship with you. Someone who says, "I think we should explore other options," may be expressing fear about the current direction, disagreement they don't feel safe stating directly, a need for more data before committing, or genuine excitement about an alternative they haven't yet named. The words are identical across all four possibilities. The emotional subtext is completely different, and responding only to the words while missing the subtext means you are responding to the wrong thing. Level 3 is the motivational layer. This is where the deepest listeners operate. At this level, you are hearing not just what someone says and how they feel, but what they fundamentally need. What values, fears, or goals are driving the entire conversation from beneath the surface. When a team member continually raises objections in planning meetings, they might be expressing a need for certainty, a fear of being blindsided, or a desire to be seen as someone who protects the team from risk. When a client keeps steering conversations back to price, they might be feeling anxiety about the decision, a need to feel smart about the purchase, or a genuine constraint that hasn't been fully disclosed. Addressing the underlying need rather than just the surface statement almost always produces better outcomes. The primary enemy of deep listening is the human mind's compulsive habit of using listening time to prepare speaking time. The moment someone starts talking, most people begin drafting their response. By the time the other person finishes their sentence, they are already performing a kind of verbal sprinting, barely waiting for the air to clear before releasing whatever they had queued up. The result is a series of semi-related monologues passing each other in opposite directions, which is what most people mistake for conversation. Interrupting this pattern requires a deliberate practice that feels deeply counterintuitive at first. Deferral. When someone finishes speaking, do not speak immediately. Pause. 1 full second. 2. Let what they said actually settle. Ask yourself, did I hear all of that? Did I understand the feeling underneath the words? Is there something I might have missed? This brief pause signals to the speaker that you are genuinely processing, not just waiting. It signals to your own brain that the incoming information deserves real consideration. And often, in that pause, something important surfaces that would have been missed in the rush. Reflection, mirroring back what you've understood before adding your own perspective, is one of the most powerful tools in active listening because it accomplishes multiple things simultaneously. It confirms your comprehension. It shows the speaker that they were truly heard. It often clarifies misunderstandings before they solidify. And it gives the speaker the experience of being fully received, which is rarer than almost anyone realizes, and more valuable than almost anything you could say. Effective reflection is not parroting. Parroting, repeating someone's exact words back to them, often feels robotic and dismissive. Genuine reflection demonstrates that you understood both the content and the significance of what was communicated. If a colleague says, "I'm exhausted with this project," every time we think we've solved something, 3 new problems appear. An effective reflection might be, "It sounds like the moving target quality of this is what's most draining. Not just the workload, but the difficulty of ever feeling like you're making real progress." That response shows you heard the feeling underneath the words, not just the complaint on the surface. Questions are active listening amplifiers, but most people ask terrible questions. Closed questions that can be answered in a word, leading questions that telegraph the answer you want, or shallow questions that don't invite the speaker to go any deeper than they already have. Powerful questions are open-ended, genuinely curious, and designed to create new thinking rather than just confirm existing understanding. What's been most frustrating about this for you? Opens a door. Are you frustrated? Closes it. What factors do you think are most important here? Invites analysis. Do you think timing is the issue? Suggests the answer while appearing to ask. The body language of listening sends its own broadcast. Leaning slightly forward communicates engagement. Open posture, arms uncrossed, body angled toward the speaker, communicates receptivity. Appropriate eye contact communicates presence. Occasional nodding, timed to genuine moments of understanding rather than performed at a steady mechanical rhythm, confirms comprehension without false enthusiasm. These nonverbal elements of listening are not decorative. They actively affect the quality of what the speaker shares. When people feel genuinely heard, they go deeper. When they feel like they're performing for an audience whose attention is half elsewhere, they stay on the surface. One of the most sophisticated dimensions of active listening is developing the skill to hear what is not being said. Every conversation has gaps, topics that circle without landing, emotions that hover around the edges of sentences without entering them, concerns that get expressed obliquely because the speaker isn't sure they'll be received. Skilled listeners notice these gaps and find ways to gently create space for them to be addressed, not by demanding, not by projecting, by asking questions that open doors rather than ones that push through them. In professional settings specifically, this skill is often the difference between a good advisor and an indispensable one. The consultant who hears the problem as stated and solves it precisely is competent. The one who hears the problem as stated and also recognizes the underlying concern the client hasn't fully articulated yet and addresses both is the one who becomes a trusted partner for years. Listening, practiced at this level, is not passive. It is the most active, engaged, cognitively demanding work of communication, and it is almost certainly the skill your competition is least focused on developing. Start there. Navigating the fire. How to handle hard conversations. Nobody gets through life or a career without them. The conversation where you have to tell someone their performance is destroying the team. The one where you have to push back against a decision from someone 3 levels above you. The one where a relationship you value has been damaged and you're the one who has to open the wound to clean it. The conversation where everything that matters is on the table, and one wrong word could cost you something you can't afford to lose. Difficult conversations are not optional. The only question is whether you walk into them with skill or without it. And the difference between those two outcomes is not just conversational comfort. It is the quality of your relationships, the health of your professional life, and your ability to navigate the unavoidable friction of being a human being among other human beings. Most people handle difficult conversations in one of 2 ways, and both are catastrophically ineffective. The first is avoidance. They see the conversation coming from weeks away, feel the dread of it rising in their chest, and find creative ways to delay, deflect, or bypass it entirely. Maybe it will resolve itself. Maybe they'll come around on their own. Maybe if I just wait long enough, it won't matter anymore. The problem with avoidance is that unaddressed issues don't dissolve. They ferment. By the time you finally have the conversation you've been avoiding, you're walking into a room with 6 months of accumulated resentment, misunderstanding, and assumption baked into every corner. The second approach is reactive escalation. The person charges in emotionally, says more than they intended to say, triggers the other person's defenses, and watches the conversation spiral into something that creates more damage than it repairs. Both parties leave the exchange feeling worse than they entered, with the original issue unresolved and a new layer of relational damage added on top. There is a third path, and it requires preparation, not for battle but for understanding. Before you enter any difficult conversation, you need to get precise about 3 things. First, what is your actual goal? Not what you want to express, but what outcome you want to create. Do you want to change a behavior, repair trust, share information that someone needs to make better decisions, clarify an expectation that has been generating conflict? If you cannot articulate your goal in one clear sentence, you are not ready to have the conversation yet. Unclear goals produce aimless conversations that wander through emotional territory without arriving anywhere. Second, what is the other person's likely experience of this situation? Not what you think they should feel, but what they actually might feel given their perspective, history, and pressures. The discipline of perspective taking, genuinely attempting to understand why this person's position might feel entirely reasonable and necessary to them, even if it feels unreasonable to you, is not just compassionate. It is strategic. When you understand someone's perspective well enough to describe it accurately before they have to explain it, you disarm defensiveness before it has a chance to build. Third, what language will you use, and what language will you avoid? The words you choose in the opening moments of a difficult conversation largely determine whether the other person enters a problem-solving mindset or a defensive one. Accusatory language, you always, you never. The reason this happened is you. Reliably triggers the amygdala response that shuts down rational processing and opens up reactive self-defense. The alternative is not weakness or vagueness. It is what conflict researchers call I language, framing your experience without making claims about the other person's character or intentions. Here's the practical difference. You're always changing priorities at the last minute without considering how it affects the rest of us versus when priorities shift without advance notice, I find it very difficult to deliver at the quality level I want to. The first is an accusation that invites counter-accusation. The second is an honest description of an experience that invites problem-solving. The underlying concern is identical. The conversational outcome that each version produces is completely different. Timing and environment are not secondary considerations. They are core variables. Choose times when both people can focus. Not 5 minutes before a major deadline. Not when either party is visibly stressed about an unrelated issue. Not in a hallway between meetings. Private settings protect dignity in ways that public settings can't. And dignity protection is not just kindness. It's strategy. When people feel they might be embarrassed publicly, they become more defensive, not less. Choose places where the physical environment supports a calm, equal exchange. Neither party holding a position of obvious physical power over the other. Both seated at a similar level. No physical barriers between you. The opening of the difficult conversation sets its entire tone. Resist the impulse to start with the problem. Start with the relationship. I want to talk about something important because I respect you and I want us to work well together. Does something that a direct problem statement cannot. It tells the other person that this conversation is being initiated out of care for the relationship, not as an attack on their character. That reframe, from attack to care, changes the neurological state both parties enter the actual discussion with. Managing your own emotional state during difficult conversations is where the rubber meets the road. Even with perfect preparation, people sometimes say things that hit you in a tender place, that trigger anger or hurt, or the kind of defensive pride that wants to respond immediately and forcefully. When you feel that surge, your effectiveness in that moment drops precipitously. Your goal is not to eliminate the emotion. That is both impossible and inadvisable. Your goal is to create a micro gap between the stimulus and your response. The simplest tool for creating that gap: breath. A slow, deliberate exhale, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system, takes less than 3 seconds and is invisible to the other person. That 3 seconds is often enough to shift from reactive to intentional. If you need more time, name it honestly. That landed harder than I expected. Give me a moment. This kind of transparency, done calmly and without drama, actually increases trust rather than signaling weakness. One of the most powerful reframes available in any difficult conversation involves distinguishing positions from interests. People enter conflicts with positions, specific demands, or stated solutions. I need this deadline extended. We need to use a different vendor. I need you to stop copying my manager on every email. Arguing about positions is almost always unproductive because positions are usually just the tip of an iceberg. Beneath every position lies a need, a fear, or an interest that the position is attempting to address. When you identify the interest beneath the position, you often find room for solutions that neither party considered when they were focused on their opposing demands. Ask, "Help me understand what you're trying to accomplish with this." Or, "What would a good outcome look like for you on this?" Or simply, "What matters most to you here?" These questions move the conversation from competing positions to shared problem solving. And shared problem solving is where resolutions that actually hold actually come from. Know when you are done for the day. Not every difficult conversation can be resolved in one session. When emotional temperature has risen past the level where productive exchange is possible, the most skillful thing you can do is pause explicitly and schedule a continuation. I want to give this the attention it deserves, and I don't think we're both in the best position to continue productively right now. Can we pick this up tomorrow morning? This is not retreat. This is emotional intelligence in action. Forcing a conversation to a conclusion when both parties are flooded produces agreements that don't stick and resentments that fester. The goal of a difficult conversation, properly approached, is not winning. It is understanding and, where possible, resolution. You can leave a difficult conversation with a fundamentally different relationship than you entered with, even when the original issue was significant, even when both parties had real grievances, even when agreement couldn't fully be reached. If both parties felt genuinely heard and treated with respect throughout the process, that is the standard worth aiming for. The magnetism code, how charisma is actually built. You've been in rooms with people who have it. You probably couldn't fully explain what it was, just that when they walked in, the energy shifted. When they spoke, people leaned forward. When they listened, you felt like the most interesting person they'd ever encountered. When they left, you somehow wanted to keep talking. That quality, magnetism, presence, charisma, whatever name you want to give it, has been mythologized for so long as a birthright, some innate gift distributed unfairly among the lucky, that most people have stopped even considering whether they might develop it. They have accepted, often unconsciously, that they are the kind of person who occupies rooms rather than commands them. That acceptance is wrong, and the research to contradict it is overwhelming. Charisma, when studied rigorously, and social scientists at institutions from Princeton to the University of California have done exactly that, turns out to be a learnable cluster of specific behaviors that produce predictable neurological responses in the people around you. It is not a personality trait. It is a practice skill set. And like every skill set, it can be broken down into components, trained systematically, and improved dramatically over time. At its foundation, charisma is about one thing: making other people feel that they genuinely matter to you. Not performing that feeling, not deploying techniques to simulate it, actually directing your full attention and authentic curiosity toward the person in front of you. In a world where most people's attention is fractured across phones, notifications, to-do lists and ambient anxiety. The experience of being fully seen by another human being is so rare and so powerful that it almost invariably creates a strong, positive impression. The neurological mechanism is dopamine. When we feel seen, heard, and valued, our brains release dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, reward, and motivation. This happens even in brief interactions, and here's the implication that most people miss. The person who triggered that dopamine release becomes associated, at a neurochemical level, with the positive feeling it produced. You are not just leaving a good impression. You are being neurologically bonded to a pleasurable experience in the other person's brain. That is what charisma actually is, stripped of its mystique. The first behavioral dimension of charisma is presence, the ability to be genuinely, completely here, in this conversation, with this person, without the visible distraction of everything else competing for your attention. This sounds simple. It is ferociously difficult in practice. Our phones alone have been engineered by teams of behavioral scientists to make sustained attention nearly impossible without deliberate counter-effort. Building presence is an attention management practice. During conversations that matter, put the phone face down or out of sight, not just on silent, but physically absent from your field of vision. Face the person with your whole body. Let your eyes actually settle on them rather than scanning the environment. Notice when your mind begins composing your next response or evaluating what they're saying, and redirect your attention back to full reception. This redirection is the practice. It takes effort at first. It becomes increasingly natural over time. The second dimension is curiosity, genuine interest in the specific human being in front of you, their experiences, their perspective, the particular way they think about things. The key word is genuine. People can feel the difference between being questioned because someone is interested in them and being questioned because someone is following a social script. The first opens people up. The second makes them feel processed. Genuine curiosity expresses itself in follow-up questions that emerge from what was actually said, not from a prepared list of conversation topics, but from real-time interest in what's being shared. When someone mentions a project they're working on, the curious response isn't, "Oh, interesting," followed by a pivot to your own experience. It's, "What's the most unexpected thing you've discovered about that?" Or, "What part of it has challenged you most?" Questions like these invite people into their own experience at a deeper level, and the act of being invited there, of having someone genuinely interested in the layers beneath the surface, is one of the most connecting experiences a human being can have. The third dimension is validation. People have a fundamental need to feel that their experiences, perspectives, and feelings are real, legitimate, and worth acknowledging. When you provide that validation, when you say, in effect, what you're experiencing makes sense, your perspective is worth taking seriously, you satisfy one of the deepest social needs humans have. This does not require agreement. You can validate someone's experience without endorsing their conclusions. I can see why you would read the situation that way, is validation. I completely agree with everything you've said, is agreement. The former creates connection. The latter may or may not be honest. Storytelling is the fourth dimension of charisma, and it operates on a different neurological channel than the other three. Stories don't just communicate information, they synchronize neural activity between speaker and listener. Neuroscientist Uri Hasson at Princeton demonstrated that a speaker telling a good story and a listener engaged with it show nearly identical brain activity patterns. Story is how two separate minds temporarily become one. But most professionals tell stories poorly. They front-load them with context and background, They bury the point in the middle. They leave no room for the listener's imagination to participate. Charismatic storytellers do the opposite. They drop you into the action immediately, let you feel the stakes before explaining them, and trust the listener to do some of the interpretive work. They share stories that show vulnerability, a mistake made, a lesson learned the hard way, a moment of genuine uncertainty before finding a path through. That vulnerability is not weakness. It is the bridge between the speaker's experience and the listener's own. The fifth dimension is energy management. Charismatic people are not endlessly on. They are strategic about where and when they bring their full energy. They protect their capacity to be genuinely present by managing the things that drain it: overcommitment, insufficient recovery time, the kind of low-grade chronic stress that erodes focus and emotional availability. Before interactions that matter, they take a few moments to reset, a brief walk, a few deep breaths, a moment of deliberate mental quieting. They arrive at important conversations with their full selves accessible, rather than the fraction that remains after a day of depleting interactions. One element of charisma that is often discussed poorly: humor. Charismatic humor is not stand-up comedy. It is the ability to find and share the absurdity, the irony, the delightful incongruity that exists in almost every human situation, and to do so in a way that invites the other person into that observation with you. Crucially, charismatic humor never comes at someone else's expense. It is observational, self-deprecating, or situational. When it lands, it creates a shared moment, and shared moments are the building blocks of connection. The distillation of everything in this chapter is this: charisma is not about making yourself more interesting. It is about being genuinely interested. It is not about performing better. It is about being more fully present. When you stop working on the performance of connection and start pursuing the reality of it, the results will exceed anything a technique can produce. The ethics of influence. How to persuade without manipulation. Let's establish something immediately, because this chapter requires it. The word persuasion has been unfairly contaminated by its association with manipulation, sales pressure, and psychological tactics designed to bypass critical thinking. That contamination has caused a great deal of well-meaning, genuinely valuable people to underuse their influence, to hold back from advocating for their ideas, their teams, or their clients with the skill and intentionality the situation deserves. Persuasion, practiced ethically, is one of the most valuable services one human being can offer another. Here's why. Every person you interact with operates within a partial information environment. They have their own knowledge, their own perspective, their own history of experience, and significant gaps in all three. When you use your communicative skill to help someone see information they hadn't considered, possibilities they hadn't imagined, or consequences they hadn't mapped, and you do this honestly, without distorting or omitting relevant contrary information, you are expanding their decision-making capacity, not compromising it. That is not manipulation. That is service. Manipulation is the other thing, the deliberate distortion of reality, the withholding of information that would change the decision, the creation of artificial urgency or false scarcity, the exploitation of psychological vulnerabilities to produce outcomes that serve the manipulator at the expense of the person being influenced. Manipulation erodes trust, damages relationships, and ultimately destroys the manipulator's long-term effectiveness. Every tactic used to compromise another person's judgment becomes a deposit in a debt account that eventually comes due. The foundation of ethical influence is understanding, deeply, specifically, genuinely, what the person you are trying to persuade actually wants, values, and cares about. Not what you think they should want. Not what is convenient for your argument, what they actually demonstrably want. This requires listening before persuading. It requires asking before telling. It requires temporarily setting aside your own perspective to fully occupy theirs. When you build your case from that foundation, when you show someone how what you are proposing serves goals they have already expressed, addresses concerns they have already named, and aligns with values they have already demonstrated, your persuasion isn't pulling them somewhere they don't want to go. It's removing the obstacles between where they are and where they've already indicated they want to be. The principle of reciprocity is fundamental to the architecture of long-term influence. When you provide genuine value to people, when you share useful information without an attached transaction, when you make a helpful introduction without immediately requesting a favor, when you go out of your way to help someone solve a problem that isn't yours to solve, you create a form of social capital that compounds over time. People generally want to return value to those who have given it to them. This is not a cynical calculation. It is an honest description of how trust and goodwill actually operate between human beings. The critical distinction is that the value you provide must be genuine, offered because it serves the other person's actual interests, not because you're making a calculated deposit in a reciprocity bank. People are remarkably good at detecting the difference between generosity and strategic generosity. The former opens relationships. The latter eventually closes them. Social proof is a legitimate and powerful influence mechanism when it is authentic and relevant. Human beings look to the behavior and outcomes of people similar to themselves when navigating uncertainty. When you can show, honestly, that people in comparable situations have benefited from what you are proposing, you reduce the perceived risk of the decision and accelerate the process of genuine buy-in. The emphasis on honestly and comparable is not incidental. Irrelevant social proof, testimonials from people with fundamentally different circumstances, can backfire by making you seem either naive or manipulative. Commitment and consistency is a psychological principle documented extensively by Robert Cialdini and studied in every major business school in the country. People experience a strong internal drive to act in ways that align with their stated beliefs and previous commitments. This drive is not a weakness to be exploited. It is a feature of how human beings maintain internal coherence and reliability. When you build an influence strategy that makes genuine connections between your proposal and the values, priorities, and commitments the other person has already publicly expressed, you are making it psychologically easier for them to say yes, not by bypassing their judgment, but by showing them that agreement with you is already consistent with who they have already said they are. Loss aversion, the well-documented tendency for humans to weight potential losses more heavily than equivalent potential gains, can be addressed honestly by helping people understand what continued inaction actually cost them. Not manufactured consequences, real ones. When you help someone accurately assess the costs of not deciding, the opportunities foreclosed, the problems compounding, the resources consumed by delay, you are providing genuinely useful decision-making information. The ethical line is clear. Describe real costs, not invented ones. The most durable form of influence is collaborative. When you involve people in shaping the solution you are proposing, when you ask for their input on design, their feedback on implementation, their concerns about timing, you transform them from audiences for your idea into co-authors of it. People do not resist their own creations. The investment of their thinking in the solution creates psychological ownership that no external persuasion technique can replicate. This collaborative approach requires more time and genuine flexibility. It produces dramatically stronger commitment and more sustainable outcomes. Timing is influence strategy. There are moments when people are genuinely open to new ideas, when they're dissatisfied with current results, navigating a transition, confronting a challenge they don't yet have a solution to. And there are moments when the same idea, delivered with identical quality, will encounter maximum resistance. Reading these windows requires patience and observation. The most skilled persuaders spend as much time choosing when to make their case as they spend on how to make it. Finally, the most powerful influence you can ever develop is the influence of a genuine track record. When people have direct experience of your competence, your honesty, and your commitment to their interests over time, when they know from lived evidence that you give them your best thinking, even when it contradicts what they want to hear, that your recommendations consistently serve their actual interests rather than your convenience, your influence in any specific conversation becomes almost effortless. Reputation is the ultimate persuasive asset. Build it deliberately, protect it fiercely, and let it do the heavy lifting when it matters most. Performing under fire, speaking when the stakes are highest. There is a moment every serious communicator eventually faces. The room is packed. The audience matters. The outcome is significant. And right before you open your mouth, your body does something that feels like betrayal. Your heart accelerates. Your hands go slightly damp. Your thoughts scatter like startled birds, and that internal voice begins its familiar sabotage. You are not ready for this. That moment is not your enemy. It is your body doing exactly what 300,000 years of human evolution designed it to do, flooding your system with the resources needed to perform at maximum capacity under conditions of high importance. The problem is not the response. The problem is the story you have been taught to attach to it. Here is the reframe that changes everything. The physiological signatures of anxiety and peak performance are, at the biological level, nearly identical. Elevated heart rate, heightened sensory awareness, accelerated processing speed, heightened physical readiness. The only difference is interpretation, and interpretation is a choice. When elite communicators feel these sensations before high-stakes moments, they do not interpret them as warning signals. They interpret them as launch signals. Their internal narrative is not, "I am nervous and might fail." It is, "I am activated and ready to perform." This is not positive thinking. It is neurological accuracy. Stanford psychologist Kelly McGonigal's research on stress reappraisal showed measurable performance improvements in people who learned to interpret stress arousal as preparation rather than threat. Harvard Business School researcher Alison Wood Brooks demonstrated in multiple studies that people who reframe pre-performance anxiety as excitement by simply saying, "I am excited" to themselves before a challenging task, outperform those who tried to calm down or suppress the anxiety. The reframe works not by eliminating the physiological response, but by converting it from interference into fuel. Say it before you walk in. "I am ready for this," not as a comfort blanket, as a neurological instruction. Understanding what is actually happening in your nervous system under pressure gives you specific evidence-based tools for managing it. When you perceive a situation as high stakes, your sympathetic nervous system activates, releasing cortisol and adrenaline. This is the fight-or-flight cascade that served your ancestors well when the stakes involved predators, and serves you poorly when the stakes involve a Q&A with a skeptical board of directors. The antidote is direct activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and recover system that countermands the stress response and restores access to the higher-order cognitive functions you need for strategic communication. The fastest, most reliable tool for parasympathetic activation is controlled breathing with an extended exhale. Specifically, inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7 counts, exhale for 8 counts. Repeat 4 times. This pattern is not arbitrary. The extended exhale activates the vagus nerve, which is the primary pathway through which your brain signals to your body that the threat has passed and that calm, rational operation is appropriate. 4 cycles of this pattern, done in a bathroom or quiet corner before you enter the room, will measurably shift your physiological state in under 2 minutes. Let's address preparation, because most people prepare incorrectly for high-pressure speaking situations, and incorrect preparation actually increases anxiety rather than reducing it. The most common preparation mistake is script memorization. People write out word for word what they intend to say, drill it until they can recite it, and then walk into the room dependent on that specific sequence of words. This creates what performance psychologists call choking risk, a single moment of deviation from the script, a single question that arrives at an unexpected angle, a single disruption in the expected flow of events, and the entire structure collapses. The speaker is suddenly without their crutch in the worst possible moment. Effective preparation builds frameworks, not scripts. Know your material at a level deep enough that you can explain any part of it 5 different ways, using 5 different analogies to 5 different types of audiences. Know your key points with crystalline clarity. Know the evidence and examples that support each one. Know the transitions between them. But stay flexibly fluent rather than rigidly memorized. Fluency cannot be disrupted by an unexpected question. A memorized script can. Anticipate the hardest questions you might face, not to script your answers, but to have thought through the territory so that no question arrives as a complete surprise. The worst thing that happens to a speaker under pressure is encountering something they have genuinely never considered, because in that moment they must simultaneously manage the surprise, regulate the spike of anxiety it produces, retrieve whatever relevant knowledge they have, and construct a response, all at a moment when their cognitive resources are already under load. Prior thinking about difficult territory reduces this problem dramatically. Visualization, detailed sensory-specific mental rehearsal of the situation you are preparing for, is not something reserved for Olympic athletes. It is a standard practice among the most successful trial lawyers in the country, the executives who regularly command rooms of skeptical investors, and the professional speakers who step onto major stages with apparent effortlessness. When you vividly imagine yourself in the specific setting, making eye contact with specific types of faces in the audience, delivering your key points with confidence and watching them land, your brain builds neural pathways that support that performance as if the rehearsal actually occurred. Include challenges in your visualization. Imagine a hostile question arriving unexpectedly and see yourself receiving it with calm curiosity, rather than defensive contraction. Imagine losing your place momentarily and see yourself pausing briefly, finding your thread, and continuing with composure. Imagine the technology failing and see yourself adapting gracefully. By mentally rehearsing successful navigation of adversity, you make the adversity, when it inevitably arrives, feel manageable rather than catastrophic. Physical preparation is a legitimate professional tool. Regular aerobic exercise measurably reduces baseline anxiety and improves the body's ability to recover from stress activation. Adequate sleep, which most high-achieving Americans systematically under-prioritize, is the single largest factor in cognitive performance, including vocabulary access, working memory capacity, and emotional regulation. In the 48 hours before any high-stakes communication event, your physical choices are preparation choices. On the day itself, arrive early. Arrive early not just so you are not rushed, but because early arrival gives you the opportunity to do something psychologically valuable. To occupy the space before the stakes arrive. Walk to the front of the room. Stand where you will stand. Speak a few words into the air. Establish your physical relationship with the environment before the environment becomes high stakes. This is a technique military officers use before significant operations, that surgeons use before complex procedures, that championship athletes use before major competitions. It works. One of the most undervalued strategies for performing well under pressure is the shift from self-focus to service focus. When a speaker is primarily concerned with how they are being perceived, whether they look confident, whether people are judging them, whether they are living up to some imagined standard, they are consuming cognitive resources on self-monitoring that should be directed toward the audience and the content. The internal experience is one of constant evaluation and potential threat. It is exhausting, and it shows. When a speaker is primarily focused on the audience, what do these people need? What is the most useful thing I can give them right now? How can I make this as clear and valuable as possible for the people in this room? The self-monitoring diminishes naturally. There is simply less mental bandwidth available for anxiety when it is fully occupied with genuine service. This is not a trick. It is a fundamental reorientation of purpose that changes the entire emotional architecture of the speaking experience. Finally, build pressure tolerance through graduated exposure. Every time you voluntarily step into a speaking situation that stretches your current comfort zone, a team meeting where you usually stay quiet, an industry event where you don't know anyone, a neighborhood gathering where you are asked to say a few words and successfully navigate it, you deposit evidence into your brain's threat assessment register. Over time, that register updates its conclusion. High-stakes speaking moves from the threat category to the manageable challenge category, and eventually, for many people who commit to this practice, into the opportunity category. Pressure is the indicator of importance. It means something real is at stake. Learn to read it that way, and it stops being your adversary and starts being your ally. The stage is yours. Mastering public speaking and presentations. You've probably heard the statistic, public speaking ranks above death on surveys of common fears. People are more afraid of standing at a podium than of dying. A comedian famously observed that this means most people at a funeral would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. Whether or not the statistic is perfectly accurate, it points to something real. Public speaking activates fear at a primal level for a large percentage of the population. And it is worth asking why, because understanding the root of that fear is the most direct path to dismantling it. The fear of public speaking is, at its core, the fear of being judged while visible and vulnerable. In our evolutionary past, being the focus of a group's collective attention was frequently a precursor to being held accountable for a transgression, for a failure, for a deviation from social norms. The social stakes of public evaluation were genuine and sometimes severe. That threat detection wiring has not updated itself for the contemporary professional conference room. Your nervous system still reads, "Everyone is looking at me," as a signal worth taking seriously. The antidote is not eliminating the awareness that people are looking at you. It is fundamentally shifting what that awareness means. The best presenters in America, the ones who step onto a TEDx stage in San Francisco, or walk into a boardroom in Chicago, or deliver a keynote at a trade convention in Las Vegas, and immediately command the room, share one orientation that distinguishes them from everyone else. They are not there to be evaluated. They are there to give something. The moment a speaker stops thinking, "How am I doing?" and starts thinking, "What does this audience need?" the entire emotional architecture of the presentation shifts. This is the foundational reframe of great public speaking. You are not performing for judgment. You are serving a need. and service is a much more stable emotional platform than performance. Before you prepare a single slide or write a single bullet point, answer this question. What does this specific audience need to leave with that they didn't bring in? Not, what do you want to say? What do they need to receive? The answer to that question is your entire presentation. Everything else, the structure, the stories, the evidence, the visual aids, is just the vehicle for delivering that answer as clearly, memorably, and powerfully as possible. Structure matters enormously in presentation, and the most effective structures are simpler than most people think. Begin with a compelling opening that earns the audience's attention immediately. Not, "Good morning, my name is Michael, and today I'm going to be talking to you about quarterly results," which loses attention before it has been earned, but something that creates immediate relevance, curiosity, or energy. A counterintuitive fact. A brief, specific story with an unresolved tension. A question that the audience genuinely doesn't know the answer to, but immediately wants to. A bold, clear statement of something they might have been thinking but not saying. From the opening, preview your destination without making it a formal agenda recitation. In the next 20 minutes, you're going to see why the conventional approach to this problem is solving the wrong equation, and what the right equation looks like. That sentence tells the audience what they're going to get and creates a reason to stay with you until they get it. It establishes forward momentum without giving away the conclusion. Develop no more than 3 to 5 core points and develop each one fully rather than covering 10 things at the surface level. The human brain does not retain long, flat lists. It retains a small number of ideas that are explored with specificity, supported with evidence, and illustrated with stories. Every main point should follow a consistent architecture. State the point clearly and directly. Provide evidence or reasoning that establishes its validity. Illustrate it with a specific, concrete story or example. And connect it explicitly to why it matters for this audience in their current situation. Stories are the most powerful tool in your presentation kit. Not because they are entertaining, though they often are, but because they are neurologically superior vehicles for both comprehension and memory. Information presented narratively is retained at significantly higher rates than information presented as abstract propositions. Emotion, which stories reliably generate, acts as a neurochemical bookmark. Your brain tags emotionally resonant content as worth remembering. And as we noted in the previous chapter, stories synchronize neural activity between speaker and listener in ways that pure exposition cannot achieve. The best stories for presentations are personal, not in the sense that they must involve private information, but in the sense that they come from direct experience rather than second-hand accounts. A client I worked with in Denver last year was facing exactly this challenge. Is more compelling than research suggests that organizations often struggle with. The first puts a face and a context on the abstract. The second remains in the realm of the general. Visual aids deserve specific attention because they are so commonly misused. The cardinal error, and it is rampant in corporate America, is using slides as a teleprompter. Slides packed with text that the presenter reads verbatim while the audience reads along silently is not a presentation. It is a document being performed poorly when it would be better served by simply being sent as an email. If your slides can be read without you, you are not necessary to your own presentation. Slides should do things that your words alone cannot easily accomplish. Show data visually in ways that reveal patterns. Display images that create emotional context or demonstrate concepts. Organize information spatially in ways that clarify relationships. They are support structures, not scripts. The presenter is the presentation. The slides are the set. Delivery, the actual physical and vocal execution of the presentation, should feel like a conversation with the room, not a performance for it. The best presentations feel like an interesting, well-organized discussion with a very knowledgeable friend who is genuinely excited about what they're sharing. Conversational confidence. Words chosen in real time from deep familiarity with the material, not recited from memory. Eye contact that feels like genuine engagement rather than a technique being applied. Energy that emerges from authentic investment in the content. Eye contact in presentations follows the one thought per person principle. Pick one person. Hold their gaze for the duration of one complete thought, a sentence or two. Then move to someone in a different part of the room. This creates the sensation of personal connection at scale. Each individual in the audience periodically feels that you are speaking specifically to them, which maintains engagement in ways that a scanning or sweeping gaze cannot. The close of your presentation is your last impression and your clearest opportunity to drive action. Do not waste it with, "Well, that's all I have," or "Any questions?" End with the same intentionality you brought to the opening. Summarize your core message in one clear sentence. State explicitly what you want the audience to take away or do. End on a note that provides emotional resonance, a callback to your opening story, a forward-looking vision, a challenge or invitation that leaves the audience with a sense of possibility. Then, stop. Resist the pull to add one more thing after the real ending. A clear, confident stop after a strong close is more powerful than anything you could say next. Every presentation is a skill-building opportunity, regardless of how it goes. After every significant speaking event, spend 10 minutes in honest reflection. What worked? What fell flat? What did you notice about the audience's engagement at different points? What would you do differently? This habit of post-performance reflection accelerates improvement faster than almost anything else because it converts experience, which everyone accumulates passively, into deliberate learning. The emotional intelligence advantage in communication. There is a version of every communicative skill we've discussed in this book: the technical version, the intellectual version, the correctly performed version, that still somehow falls flat. The voice is trained, the vocabulary is precise, the structure is sound, and yet something essential is missing. The audience doesn't fully trust it. The connection doesn't fully form. The message lands informationally but not emotionally. The missing element is almost always emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence in communication is not softness. It is not the willingness to talk endlessly about feelings in contexts where that is neither welcome nor appropriate. It is the sophisticated, real-time ability to read the emotional dimensions of any interaction, manage your own internal state under pressure, respond to others with genuine understanding, and navigate the invisible emotional terrain that exists beneath every professional conversation. Without it, even technically perfect communication misses. With it, even imperfect communication can create profound connection. The framework most widely used in professional settings identifies 4 distinct domains: self-awareness, understanding your own emotional patterns, triggers, and tendencies; self-management, regulating your emotions so they inform your responses rather than hijack them; social awareness, accurately reading the emotional states of others; relationship management, using all of the above to navigate interactions in ways that build rather than damage connection and trust. Self-awareness is the non-negotiable foundation. You cannot manage what you cannot see. Most professionals operate with significant blind spots about how their emotional states affect their communication. They believe they are presenting as calm and neutral when they are broadcasting anxiety. They think they are being direct when they are coming across as aggressive. They imagine they are enthusiastic when others are experiencing them as overwhelming. These gaps between self-perception and impact are not character flaws. They are calibration problems, and calibration problems are solvable. The practice of self-awareness begins with body scanning, a regular habit of checking in with your physical state before, during, and after important interactions. What is your heart rate? Where are you holding tension? Is your jaw tight? Are your shoulders elevated? Your body records emotional information before your conscious mind processes it. Learning to read those physical signals gives you early warning of emotional states that might be affecting your communication in ways you haven't consciously noticed. Self-management, the ability to choose your response rather than automatically enacting your first impulse, is built through the practice of that micro-gap we discussed in the difficult conversations chapter. The brief pause between stimulus and response, where you regain access to intentional choice. The more consistently you practice this pause in low-stakes situations, the more available it becomes in high-stakes ones. Emotional regulation is a muscle. It strengthens with use and atrophies with disuse. A critical point that is often missed: emotional self-management is not emotional suppression. Suppressing emotions requires cognitive effort that drains the resources you need for effective communication. Research by Stanford psychologist James Gross demonstrates that emotional suppression consistently impairs social functioning and relationship quality. The goal is not to eliminate or hide your emotions. It is to process them accurately, express them appropriately, and prevent them from driving behavior in directions that undermine your goals. Social awareness, reading the emotional states of others, operates through careful attention to the full signal, not just the verbal component. Words carry about 7% of a speaker's actual emotional communication in face-to-face interaction. The rest is distributed across vocal qualities, facial expressions, body posture, gesture, and the subtle behavioral changes that accompany different emotional states. You already have the hardware to read all of this. The question is whether you are directing your attention toward it. Develop the habit of checking in on the emotional temperature of conversations as you move through them. Not once, at the start, but continuously, because emotional states shift, sometimes dramatically, over the course of an interaction. Is the person in front of you more or less engaged than they were 10 minutes ago? Have they moved from openness to guardedness? Is there something in their posture or their vocal quality that suggests they are managing something they haven't put into words? These signals, read accurately, allow you to adjust your approach in real time, rather than charging forward with a strategy that stopped working 15 minutes ago. The concept of emotional contagion is directly relevant to every chapter of this book. Research by Elaine Hatfield, Howard Friedman, and dozens of subsequent researchers has documented that emotions spread between people through unconscious mimicry, a process mediated by the same mirror neuron system we discussed in Chapter 1. When you walk into a room carrying calm confidence, the people in that room are neurologically pulled toward a calmer, more confident state. When you walk in carrying anxiety or defensiveness, you seed those states in the people around you before you have spoken a single word. This has practical implications that extend in both directions. You are responsible for the emotional climate you bring into rooms. And when you find yourself in rooms with difficult emotional climates, you now understand the mechanism, which means you can consciously choose not to mirror the anxiety or negativity around you, and instead bring your own intentional emotional state as a countervailing force. Empathy, the capacity to genuinely understand and share in another person's emotional experience, is the interpersonal bridge that transforms competent communication into truly powerful communication. Empathy is not sympathy, which is feeling sorry for someone from a distance. Empathy is the imaginative act of genuinely inhabiting another person's perspective well enough to understand why they feel as they do. It requires temporarily setting aside your own frame of reference, your assumptions, your judgments, your agenda, and fully occupying theirs. The communicative expression of empathy is validation, acknowledging that another person's emotional experience is real, understandable, and worthy of consideration, even when you don't fully share it or agree with their interpretation. Validation does not require agreement. I can see why that situation would create real frustration, is not saying, you are right to be frustrated. It is saying, your experience of frustration makes sense to me, given what you've described. That distinction matters, and most people feel the difference in how they are received when they make it. Conflict situations require the most sophisticated emotional intelligence, because emotions are highest and rational processing is most compromised. The emotionally intelligent approach to conflict begins with a fundamental reframe. Conflict is information. The emotion it generates is data about what people care about deeply, where their values are threatened, what unmet needs are driving their behavior. Rather than treating emotional expression in conflict as something to manage or neutralize, the emotionally intelligent communicator treats it as communication that deserves the same quality of attention as any other. When you consistently bring high emotional intelligence to your professional interactions, when people feel accurately seen, genuinely understood, and responded to with real sensitivity to their full experience, you build a quality of relationship that opens doors which technical competence alone cannot. Trust of this depth is rare. It is also extraordinarily durable and extraordinarily valuable. Speaking across difference. Cultural intelligence in communication. The United States is the most linguistically and culturally diverse nation in the history of the world. Within the span of a single workday in any major American city, you might present to a Japanese tech executive whose communication style prioritizes indirect expression and collective harmony, negotiate with a Brazilian entrepreneur who reads relationship warmth as a prerequisite for any serious business conversation, collaborate with a German colleague who considers directness and precision the highest forms of professional respect, and debrief with a team that includes first-generation Americans carrying the communication norms of 6 different countries alongside their professional training. In this environment, cultural intelligence in communication is not a soft skill. It is a competitive necessity, and yet most professionals approach cross-cultural communication with a strategy that amounts to speaking louder and more slowly. They keep doing what they have always done, with minor adjustments that often come across as patronizing, and then they attribute the breakdown to the other party's difference rather than their own adaptational failure. Cultural intelligence begins where most people are most resistant to starting, with honest examination of your own cultural programming. You have a communication style. It feels natural to you, which means it feels neutral, like just the way reasonable people communicate. It is not neutral. It is the product of everything that shaped you, the region where you grew up, the family structure you were raised in, the educational institutions you passed through, the professional culture you were trained within. Your directness or indirectness, your comfort or discomfort with silence, your relationship to authority and hierarchy, your sense of how quickly trust should be established before business can be conducted. All of these are culturally conditioned, and none of them are universal. The moment you genuinely internalize that your communication norms are one valid approach among many, rather than the default standard against which others are measured, your capacity for cross-cultural effectiveness expands dramatically. One of the most useful frameworks in cross-cultural communication is the distinction between high-context and low-context communication cultures, developed by anthropologist Edward Hall and refined by decades of subsequent research. Low-context cultures, the United States, Germany, Scandinavia, Australia, communicate primarily through explicit verbal content. What is said is what is meant. Directness is valued. Ambiguity is seen as poor communication. In these cultures, the most admired communicators are typically clear, concise, and frank. High-context cultures, Japan, China, much of the Middle East and Latin America, many African nations, communicate a significant portion of their meaning through what is implied, what is left unsaid, through context, relationship, and nonverbal signals. In these cultures, direct confrontation or explicit disagreement can feel deeply inappropriate, even disrespectful. Meaning is carried not just in the words, but in the space around them, in the timing of silence, in subtle shifts of expression and posture that carry communicative weight invisible to an outsider who is only listening to the literal content. When a low-context communicator interacts with a high-context one without this awareness, the results are predictable. The American reads polite indirection as agreement and is blindsided when the deal falls through. The Japanese executive reads the American's directness as aggression and concludes that the relationship is not ready for serious business. Both parties walk away with incorrect interpretations, damaged prospects, and a vague sense that the other person was somehow unreasonable. Neither is. They are both operating competently within their own framework, in the absence of the others. Power distance, the degree to which cultures accept and expect unequal distribution of authority, creates a separate layer of communication complexity. In high power distance cultures, including many parts of Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, the protocol for how people at different organizational levels communicate with each other is carefully observed. Challenging a senior person's stated position directly, interrupting someone of higher status, or expressing disagreement openly in a group setting can be experienced as serious violations of social order, regardless of the intellectual merit of what's being said. In lower power distance cultures like Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, and increasingly in modern American startup culture, hierarchy is expected to be challenged when the reasoning is sound. Deferring to authority without examination is seen as intellectually weak. Flat organizational structures are prized. What is experienced as healthy intellectual engagement in a low power distance context may feel dangerously insubordinate in a high power distance one. Navigating this requires a specific kind of social calibration, reading the room accurately before deciding how to engage, rather than applying your default settings and hoping they translate. The individualism-collectivism dimension adds another layer of complexity that shows up constantly in professional American contexts. The United States is the most individualistic culture on Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions Index. We celebrate personal achievement, personal accountability, personal advocacy. Our communication norms reflect this. People are expected to promote their ideas, claim credit for their contributions, and advocate assertively for their interests. Many cultures that are heavily represented in the American workforce, East Asian, South Asian, many Latin American, prioritize collective harmony and group success over individual distinction. In these contexts, claiming personal credit can feel uncomfortable or inappropriate. Singling out an individual for public praise in front of their team may create embarrassment rather than motivation. Direct individual feedback may need to be delivered more indirectly to land, without causing loss of face. Understanding these dimensions is not about stereotyping. Every individual is more than their cultural background, and significant variation exists within every cultural group. These frameworks are starting points for understanding, not predictions about how any specific person will behave. The skill is using cultural knowledge to calibrate your observational sensitivity, then reading the individual in front of you rather than the category. Nonverbal communication varies dramatically across cultures in ways that create constant, mostly invisible friction in cross-cultural professional interactions. Eye contact that communicates honest engagement and confidence in American culture can read as aggressive or disrespectful in some East Asian contexts. The amount of physical space considered appropriate between speakers varies widely. Americans typically need more personal space than many Latin American or Southern European counterparts, and misjudging this can register as coldness or, alternatively, as uncomfortable intrusion. Gestures that carry positive meaning in one culture carry deeply offensive meaning in another. The practical approach is not to memorize an endless catalog of cultural do's and don'ts. It is to develop sensitivity to feedback, to notice when your nonverbal behaviors seem to be creating unexpected reactions, and to adjust without overcorrecting or performing. When someone consistently steps back when you move closer, respect the signal. When your eye contact seems to create discomfort rather than connection, soften it. When your directness seems to create shutdown rather than clarity, introduce more indirection. Language differences, even between people nominally sharing English as a common language, deserve specific acknowledgement. Idiomatic English is deeply culturally embedded. American slang, sports metaphors, regional expressions, and pop culture references that are completely transparent to a native speaker can be opaque to a highly educated non-native speaker who learned formal English, speaking more slowly, using cleaner sentence structure, avoiding idioms in critical moments, and checking for comprehension, not by asking, "Do you understand?" which can feel condescending, but by inviting questions and watching for the specific kind of nodding that doesn't mean understanding, are all strategies that serve genuine communication rather than just the appearance of it. The deepest cultural intelligence is curiosity, authentic interest in how other people see the world, genuine openness to approaches that differ from your own, and the intellectual humility to recognize that the way you have learned to communicate is not the only right way. When people from different cultural backgrounds sense that curiosity, they become far more patient partners in navigating the inevitable differences. When they sense judgment or impatience, they close. Make it a habit. Before any significant cross-cultural interaction, spend 5 minutes asking yourself what you actually know about this person's communication context, what you might be assuming that could be wrong, and what questions you could ask that would help you adapt intelligently. That 5 minutes will do more for your cross-cultural effectiveness than any training program you have ever attended. The connection economy. Networking and advanced conversation. The most valuable professional asset you will ever build is not a skill set. It is not a resume. It is not a portfolio. It is a network of people who genuinely know you, trust your judgment, and want to see you succeed. The word networking has been so thoroughly tainted by its association with hollow small talk at crowded industry mixers, with the calculated exchange of business cards between people who will never speak again, with the performative relationship building that everyone recognizes as transactional, that many genuine, thoughtful professionals have essentially opted out of it. They attend the events. They stand at the edges. They leave early and call it done. They are leaving extraordinary value on the table, and they are doing so because they've conflated the shallow version of networking with the whole of it, real networking. The kind that generates durable professional relationships and genuine opportunities is simply relationship building at scale, using the same principles that make any relationship valuable. Authentic interest, mutual generosity, consistent follow-through, and the willingness to invest time and attention in other people without an immediate transactional expectation. The foundation is authentic curiosity, and it cannot be faked successfully for long. People have finely calibrated detectors for whether the person asking questions about their work is genuinely interested or performing interest as a social strategy. The difference between these two registers not just intellectually but viscerally. The former creates openness and warmth. The latter creates a subtle guardedness that prevents real connection from forming. Fortunately, genuine curiosity is something that can be developed and directed, even toward topics that don't immediately interest you. Every person you encounter has expertise in something, has navigated experiences you haven't, has developed perspectives shaped by circumstances you haven't faced. When you genuinely orient toward those dimensions of a person, rather than their title or their LinkedIn summary, you almost always find something legitimately interesting, and people can feel the difference between being reduced to their professional category and being engaged as a specific, interesting human being. The opening move in any networking conversation matters more than most people realize. Generic opening questions produce generic conversations that leave no residue. "What do you do?" is the default, and it produces the default response. A job title delivered with varying degrees of enthusiasm, followed by a reciprocal question, followed by a brief interval of parallel monologues before both parties drift in different directions. Nothing memorable, nothing sticky. Better openings are specific to the context and invite genuine engagement. At a conference, what's been the most useful session for you so far? At an industry event, what's the question you feel like nobody in this industry is asking loudly enough? At any professional gathering, what's the most interesting thing you've been working on lately? These questions require actual thought. They invite people past their professional summary into their current, lived professional experience. And the conversations they generate are the ones that continue past that first exchange. The follow-through is where most networking efforts fail. Meeting someone interesting, having a genuine conversation, exchanging contact information, and then doing nothing is the norm. The standard in most professional circles is so low that the bar for distinction is remarkably achievable. Send a follow-up message within 48 hours and reference something specific from the conversation you had. Not, "Great to meet you last night," but, "I've been thinking about what you said about the shift in how enterprise clients are evaluating AI tools. I came across this piece this morning that connects to exactly that." That follow-up does something that most professional correspondents cannot. It proves that you were actually listening. One of the most powerful things you can do for your network is make connections between people who should know each other, but don't. When you hear a challenge someone is grappling with, and immediately think of someone else in your network who has navigated exactly that, and you make the introduction, you create value for both parties and cement your own reputation as someone whose network is genuinely useful. This kind of facilitation is the behavioral signature of the most respected networkers in any industry. Advanced conversational skill extends far beyond the networking context into every professional and personal dimension of life. The ability to navigate conversations with different personality types, analytical thinkers who need evidence and precision, intuitive thinkers who connect through story and vision, relationship-oriented people who need warmth and trust before substance, pragmatists who want bottom lines first and details only if they ask, is what separates people who connect broadly from people who connect only with those similar to themselves. Reading personality type in real time is a learnable, perceptual skill. Analytical types tend to ask more questions before committing, speak more precisely, want to know how conclusions were reached, Intuitive types connect through the big picture, become impatient with excessive detail, communicate in more associative and narrative ways. Relationship-oriented people typically begin interactions with personal warmth and expect it to be reciprocated before business is engaged. Pragmatists lead with outcomes and value efficiency above other conversational virtues. None of these types are better or worse. Each represents a legitimate and consistent pattern of cognitive and social style. The communicator who can flex their approach to meet each of these types where they are, without abandoning their authentic voice, will build relationships across a far wider range of people than the communicator who operates exclusively in their own preferred mode. In the digital communication landscape that now shapes a substantial portion of professional interaction, the same fundamental principles apply, but the expression changes. Video calls demand more intentional presence than in-person interaction because the absence of shared physical space reduces the natural pull of attention. Looking into the camera rather than the screen, eliminating background distractions, ensuring good lighting that allows your facial expressions to be read clearly. These are the digital equivalents of the physical presence signals we discussed in Chapter 3. Written communication, email, Slack, LinkedIn, requires its own set of skills that are too often treated as second tier. In written professional communication, precision matters more than in spoken conversation because the tonal cues that soften or contextualize spoken language are absent. A sentence that sounds direct in person can read as curt in an email. Something that would land as warm and casual in a hallway conversation can seem inappropriately informal in a written client communication. Developing the sensitivity to calibrate your written register, to read how your text will be received in the absence of vocal and nonverbal context, is a skill worth deliberate development. Build your network before you need it. The professionals who are most effective at leveraging their networks are the ones who invested in those relationships during the long, quiet periods between urgencies, who showed genuine interest in people's work, who provided value without expectation, who stayed connected through consistent small gestures over years. When a significant need or opportunity arrives, their network responds with resources, introductions, and opportunities that only relationships of real depth and trust can generate. The person who starts trying to build that network when the need is already pressing almost invariably finds it too late. Your communication, transformation, the action plan that actually works, everything in this book, the psychology, the vocal training, the vocabulary development, the listening skills, the emotional intelligence, the pressure management, the cross-cultural fluency, the networking strategies, amounts to exactly nothing if it stays in the realm of ideas you found interesting. Ideas you found interesting are everywhere. They fill podcasts and seminars and bestseller lists and conversations at dinner parties. They create brief moments of recognition. Yes, that's true, I should do that. Followed by a return to exactly the same patterns that produce the communication results you have always gotten. Transformation requires a different relationship with what you've learned. It requires moving from recognition to implementation, from inspiration to habit, from occasional application to consistent practice that eventually rewires the defaults. This final chapter is your blueprint for that move. Start with an honest assessment, because you cannot navigate to a destination without first accurately knowing your starting point. Over the next 7 days, record yourself in as many different speaking contexts as you reasonably can. Phone calls, team meetings, one-on-one conversations, any presentations you deliver. Resist the impulse to listen to these recordings immediately. Wait until the end of the week, then listen to all of them in a single session with fresh ears. You are not looking to be critical of yourself. You are looking for patterns. What do you notice about your vocal delivery? Is your pace consistent or does it accelerate when stress rises? Does your pitch remain expressive or flatten into monotone when you're focused on content? Do you hear the filler words, the ums, the likes, the you knows that you probably don't notice in real time? How do you handle moments of uncertainty? Do you recover with composure? Or do you visibly contract? What do you notice about your language? Is it precise or habituated? Do you reach for qualifiers and hedges when directness would serve better? Do your explanations flow clearly, or do they sometimes circle without landing? What do you notice about your presence in conversations? Are you genuinely there? Or are you running ahead to your next point while the other person is still finishing their current one? This assessment will be uncomfortable. It is worth every second of discomfort. The people who improve fastest are the ones with the most accurate picture of where they currently are. From that assessment, identify your 3 highest leverage development areas, not the 3 things you find most enjoyable to work on, but the 3 that would produce the greatest improvement in your actual communication outcomes. Most people have a strong instinct toward comfort, toward practicing what they are already reasonably good at, because it feels better. Elite development requires the discipline to orient toward gaps. Build a daily practice routine around those 3 areas. The structure is simple. 10 minutes of deliberate practice per area, every day, for 30 days. Not occasionally. Not when you feel inspired. Every day, including the days when you don't feel like it, especially those days. Because consistency under resistance is precisely what converts deliberate practice into automatic competence. For vocal development, read aloud each morning from material that challenges your natural pace and expression. Editorials in The Atlantic, arguments in The New Yorker, narrative journalism in The Times. Read them standing, with good posture and diaphragmatic support. Record yourself periodically and compare recordings from week 1 to week 4. The improvement will surprise you. For vocabulary, adopt the one-word practice. Identify 1 word each day from your passive vocabulary, a word you recognize but don't use, and find a genuine, natural opportunity to use it in conversation before the day ends. This is not about forcing unusual vocabulary into conversations where it doesn't belong. It is about incrementally expanding the range of your active expression by moving words from the shelf to the tool belt. For listening, set a specific intention before every significant conversation for 30 days. I will not formulate my response until this person has finished speaking. Just that. A single, concrete, behaviorally specific commitment that addresses the root cause of most poor listening in a single instruction. At the end of each such conversation, spend 30 seconds asking yourself, did I catch what was underneath the words, or only what was on the surface? Join a structured speaking practice organization. Toastmasters International has chapters in virtually every American city and town, and its combination of regular speaking opportunities, structured feedback, and community accountability is difficult to replicate through self-directed practice alone. Treat the first 3 months as pure data collection. Speak at every opportunity, absorb every piece of feedback without defensiveness, and notice what patterns emerge across different evaluators. Create a communication accountability partnership with someone who is also developing their skills. Weekly check-ins of 15 minutes, structured around specific commitments made the previous week, produce dramatically better outcomes than solo development efforts. Not because the accountability partner provides superior coaching, but because the social contract of a stated commitment is a significantly more reliable motivator than private intention alone. Document your learning. After every significant communication event, every difficult conversation navigated, every presentation delivered, Every high-stakes interaction completed, write 3 things: what worked, what you would do differently, and what you are going to practice specifically as a result. This habit of deliberate post-event reflection converts experience, which everyone accumulates, into learning, which only the deliberate acquire. The 30-day implementation period is designed to establish the habits that make the next 90 days possible. In days 31 through 90, tackle the more complex, longer arc skills: sustained high-pressure performance, deep emotional intelligence in conflicted relationships, authentic charisma development, cross-cultural fluency with the specific populations you interact with most. These skills don't develop in a month. They develop over sustained, consistent effort across varied real-world situations, which is exactly what you will have been building the capacity for in the first 30 days. Your 12-month vision should include specific, concrete communication outcomes, not just skill metrics, but actual changes in how your professional and personal life looks as a result of superior communication. Leading a team that trusts your judgment and follows your vision with genuine commitment. Closing opportunities because people believe in you as much as they believe in the product you're representing. Navigating difficult relationships with the confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever the conversation requires. Standing in rooms, boardrooms, conference stages, difficult conversations, charge negotiations, and knowing that your ability to communicate effectively is one of the most reliable assets you have. The final insight of this book is also its most important. Powerful communication is not a performance you layer over who you are. It is the fullest expression of who you are. Your thinking made audible, your values made visible, your ideas given the vehicle they deserve to travel on. When you develop these skills with genuine commitment, you are not becoming someone else. You are becoming more fully yourself. Clearer, more confident, more connected, and more capable of creating in this world the outcomes your ideas have always deserved. Your voice matters. Every conversation is an opportunity to use it intentionally. Every interaction is a chance to give someone something valuable. Clarity, connection, insight, energy, the feeling of being genuinely understood. Start now. Not when you feel ready. Not after a few more weeks of preparation. Now, in the very next conversation you have after closing this book, your voice is waiting. The world is ready to hear it.